So I want to take a minute to talk about something that I don't really understand how it didn't make it into the mainstream media last week. And this is Trump's new executive orders. This definitely feels like it could be a tipping point in just the reality of being in America. I'm not trying to be alarmist. I know a lot of people have been saying this for quite some time now, but this is something that people should really be looking at. The immigration one is called Protecting Communities from Criminal Aliens. Yeah, I mean, what do we expect? So these were both released on April 28th, so last Tuesday, and there's some classic throwing shade at the prior administration for allowing undocumented people to enter the country, more painting them as international cartels and terrorists, calling it an invasion. This is where I think it starts to get interesting, though. It says, yet some state and local officials nevertheless continue to use their authority to violate, obstruct, and defy the enforcement of federal immigration laws. And I think we should take stock of them using language such as violate and obstruct. This will come up later when we're looking at the police executive order, and this language starts to get a little bit scarier. It continues, this is a lawless insurrection against the supremacy of federal law and the federal government's obligation to defend the territorial sovereignty of the United States. So much for states' rights, I guess, but let's keep going. Such nullification efforts often violate federal criminal laws, including those prohibiting obstruction of justice, unlawfully harboring or hiring illegal aliens, conspiracy against the United States, and conspiracy to impede federal law enforcement. So I think in the context of them arresting that judge in Wisconsin, this is where things already start to get quite scary, and we're not even like halfway through this order. We're really starting to get into some serious Nazi territory. Like, that was already apparent, but now we're basically talking about if people have to start hiding immigrants in their houses, that's now going to be illegal. We'll see in a little bit that they want to enforce a more strict and militarized police state like they did in Nazi Germany, and it's not looking good. But yeah, then we get into designation of sanctuary jurisdictions. It says within 30 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General, in coordination with the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall publish a list of states and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws. That language again, obstruct, I think is really important. The Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall notify each sanctuary jurisdiction regarding its defiance of federal immigration law enforcement and any potential violations of federal criminal law. And then the next section is on the consequences of sanctuary jurisdiction. So basically what this section is talking about is it starts with they're talking about pulling federal grants and contracts from any states that continue their sanctuary status and practices. But that isn't necessarily new news. We kind of knew that that would be coming at some point. I think what is probably the most concerning is it says those that remain in defiance of federal law, the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security shall pursue all legal remedies and enforcement measures to end these violations. So enforcement measures, basically it sounds like we're getting into territory of martial law. There's a podcast called It Could Happen Here, and the way they put it on there was this is sort of like proto-martial law. Depending on how seriously they end up pursuing this, we could have effectively military police in cities across the country enforcing this. If that doesn't scare you, if you don't think that's wrong, I don't know what to say anymore. If you don't see the parallels to fascism in the 30s and 40s, you need to go take a history class. It's kind of at that time, it's really been at that time where we have to start asking what we're willing to do to protect fellow human beings, especially when it's outlined very specifically that some of the things that people are doing are probably considered illegal. Like, what about community organizations that are housing asylum seekers? That's being called obstruction of federal law. And yeah, as we'll see in the next executive order that I'm going to talk about, they seem to be trying to implement a plan to actually enforce those as criminal violations. So yeah, strengthening and unleashing America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent civilians, except the innocent civilians and farm workers that they're arresting across the country, particularly in California, that was just blocked by a judge telling them that Customs and Border Patrol can't just randomly go up to brown people and say, show me your papers, and arrest them. But hey, Republicans are going to do their thing. The police seem to not really care in a lot of cases. So let's talk about this unleashing of police across the country. I think the important line from the first section is, my administration will therefore establish best practices at the state and local level for cities to unleash high-impact local police forces. So already we're looking at high-impact local police forces. What do they mean by that? I mean, I think at this point it's almost safe to just assume the worst. Basically, having the federal government establish what are best practices for law enforcement across the country and localities, that should be scary to everybody. It's extremely fascistic, and the conservatives, if you're going to cry about big government all the time, this is about as big government as it gets. The hypocrisy is just unreal. And then it says they will protect and defend law enforcement officers wrongly accused and abused by state and local officials. Assuming the worst, this really just sounds like they want a bunch of brown shirts and the Gestapo and to unleash a bunch of criminal police officers who have been convicted of police brutality or various different things that this administration and large portions of the country unfortunately consider to be within the bounds of the law for a police officer to use lethal or brutal force against people. And they want those people on the street because that's who's going to enforce order. It says surge resources to officers in need, trying to force law firms to provide pro bono legal services to law enforcement officers. Yeah, so that's just nuts. It says, my administration will work to ensure that law enforcement officers across the country focus on ending crime, not pursuing harmful, illegal, race and sex-based equity policies. So we gotta tie it back to DEI, no surprise there. The result will be a law-abiding society in which tenacious law enforcement officers protect the innocent, violations of law are not tolerated, and American communities are safely enjoyed by all citizens again. Clearly, when they say all their citizens again, they do not mean all citizens. I imagine the farm workers being arrested in California. I don't think those people are really enjoying the American community. The language sounds very fascistic and coercive, and they want to strike fear into people, and I don't think we should be afraid of these orders. I think we should continue to push back and believe in our communities, but these are things to take seriously, for sure. Yeah, more about providing legal resources to law enforcement officers. It gets worse that we're now trying to remove further skepticism from that group. I think a position that I always have stuck by and have not heard a reasonable counter to is that people with the most power should be held to the highest level of scrutiny in our society, and that's the president. So when Trump is saying, why won't you ask me these softball questions, or why are you guys so mean to me in this interview? It's like, it's because you're the president and you're doing crazy stuff. You should be under a lot of scrutiny. Any president should be under a lot of scrutiny. I don't care if Bernie Sanders is in office. I don't care if it's AOC and they agree more with my values. They should still be facing immense scrutiny for their positions. It's a universal standard you should apply it. There's no reason that Trump should be exempt from that, because unfortunately a certain portion of this country follows him like a cult. And law enforcement is another space that you should hold these people to account. This section 3, empowering state and local law enforcement, this is where they sort of detail out some of the crazy stuff. They say the Attorney General basically will decide and give federal resources to provide new best practices to state and local law enforcement to aggressively police communities against all crimes. As if we need more aggressive policing, Jesus Christ. But yeah, the federal government stepping in and giving its mandate on what the best practices are for state and local enforcement, we're just basically heading into martial law territory at that point. It's going to depend on how much this can be implemented. The first step in challenging this is through the courts, and there should be judges challenging this immediately. I think we definitely should do that, and even just as a precedent. But I think what's scary about this and why it feels like a tipping point is it feels like we're in a position now where we are kind of relying on police and military personnel to be good people and to not pursue awful, racist, bigoted targeting and brutality against people of color and marginalized communities and immigrants and people protecting immigrants. As somebody who's reported on these different communities, I don't myself really have a lot of faith in our police and military states to actually act in good faith and do the right thing. Doing this on a national scale, I think deploying the military, I think there's going to be some significant pushback, and so we should challenge those orders, and I don't think the military probably particularly likes to deploy against its own population, but we've seen it in history. People fall in line. We have a large swath of this country that doesn't really care about this or is supportive of it. We have a military that is aggressively propagandized and told to do what they're told, and yeah, we'll see if this shit really starts to get crazy if people just follow orders. There's things about expanding pay and quality of training, legal protections, enhanced sentences for crimes against law enforcement, promote investment in security of prisons, basically a bunch of stuff to ultimately expand prison capacity, limit people's ability to challenge and fight against police decisions, opening up the possibility of violent police re-entering the workforce or staying in the workforce and continuing to commit abhorrent crimes. What we're seeing is the breakdown of our democratic apparatus in this space. They talk about using national security assets to go after this goal, basically giving more potentially military weaponry and assets to different police forces. I don't think most people in this country think that we need to militarize our police more. I mean, at least half of the country, I would hope, doesn't think that, but we'll see. Certainly, I don't think this is going to lead to any sort of decrease in violence overall. And then there's also a bit about holding state and local officials accountable. They, of course, tie back to DEI again. Like I said, with that Wisconsin judge that was arrested, this is extremely concerning. They've laid out the groundwork in this executive order to go after, apprehend, and arrest mayors, city officials, even state level officials that are deciding they want to maintain a sanctuary status. This could all happen over the course of the next month or two. It wouldn't necessarily be a coup, it would be a military takeover for a military dictatorship. It's a complete violation of state law and state sovereignty, and I won't take any Republican seriously who likes to pretend that they support states' rights but also support Trump, because that is a completely juxtaposed, dichotomous position. There's no way to hold those two values in the same sentence. The thing that's interesting to me in terms of political analysis of this position that we're in, the tariffs are going to start having a real effect very soon. I mean, people are already seeing it, but we're likely going to have less food on the shelves. We're going to have more scarcity. It's going to get more expensive. There's going to be some real problems, and people are going to be understandably angry. Even Trump supporters will start to lose faith. With this police reform order, we could see levels of suppression that we've never seen before in the history of this country. Violent acts on behalf of the state that are unbelievable in the eyes of most Americans and people around the world. It all just depends on kind of how the cards crumble from the tower. If the tariffs are the thing that makes the tower drop and all hell breaks loose, I don't know. We'll see. Part of me in my head thinks this won't happen just because of the desire to keep order and stability, but I also, looking at history, it would suggest that this could possibly be entering a new phase of American disorder. We shouldn't pretend like this blitz of policies and horrific actions that the Trump administration is doing, we shouldn't pretend like that's not working. It is working. It's numbing people out. It's making people stop paying attention because it's overwhelming. And I think this is the time when we need to keep paying attention desperately. Because stuff like this has to be on the front page. This has to be talked about for what it is, because it is so similar to the history of fascism and what we've seen in countries in the past, in military takeovers and dictatorship. This is authoritarianism at its core, and we need to pay attention to that. But yeah, so after really cheery talk about that, I'm happy that we had May Day last week, and it seemed like there was some really good turnout and actions, and I think that's where the encouragement lies in all of this, is with the people, and there is serious resistance to these ideas. And unfortunately, it seems like there's a lot of people in this country that have to have things happen to them specifically in order to really understand the consequences. Maybe we will see more and more of that. Yeah, so we'll see. But I hope the best that we can figure this out and find a way forward.